Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chasing the Sound. A Shot at Freedom is a book about life in Hawkins, Indiana. To most people, it's just an idyllic, well-kept American town. But for Eddie Munson, it's like living in an eternally terrifying mausoleum. Luckily, he only has a few months left to survive at Hawkins High School. And what is senior year really about, if not killing time between Dungeons & Dragons with the Hellfire Club and gigs with his band? Eddie meets Paige at the worst bar in town, who works a magical spell. She escapes Hawkins and builds a super cool life for herself working for a record producer in Los Angeles. Not only is she the definition of cool with incredible taste in music, but she may be the only person who truly appreciates him as a poet and not as the embodiment of evil. But the best part, she was offering him a chance to make something of himself, and all he needed was to get her a demo of Corroded Coffin's greatest hits. Just one recording cost money. Eddie didn't have any, but he was willing to do anything, even if it meant relying on his old man, Al Munson. His dad had just stumbled back into his life with another dubious scheme up his sleeve, but Eddie knew this was his only option to make enough money for long enough. It was a risk, but if it works, he'd finally have a one-way ticket out of Hawkins. 1. When the next session came, Terry found herself in a big room at the lab with larger machines and several additional workers. And even more intimidating, a wetsuit to don and a metal tank filled with water. A tech pointed Terry to a changing room and she crammed into what might once have been a supply or custodial closet. The ghost scent of chemicals bolstered the theory. Terry pulled the tight grey suit onto her legs and over her torso, shrugging into the shoulder straps. From the places it alternately pinched or bagged, she suspected the bathing suit was made for a man. In the end, it was no less revealing than the gown. But she could ignore that. The clock, until they dosed her, ticked away in her ears. Squaring her shoulders and imagining she wore armor to overcome her nerves, she left the former closet. Brenner and his small team were waiting for her outside. They intended to submerge her in an elevated human-sized canister full of water with a long opening at the top. A steel ladder led up to it. "I feel like Harry Houdini," she said. "Doctor." Brenner tapped a finger to his temple. "Only you escape through this." "I'm curious." She leaned against a table. "How'd you end up a doctor, doing this kind of research?" Brenner checked a monitor, shrugged. "The usual way. Medical school. An interest in public service." "Where are you from?" Terry adjusted a strap on her suit. "Are we playing 20 questions?" he countered with a smile, walking over and handing her a bathing cap. She maneuvered her hair under it as best she could without a mirror. The edges pinched all the way around her scalp. "I'm nervous," she said, not to lie. "This is another thing I haven't done before." She nodded toward the canister. "Sensory deprivation tanks can be quite pleasant, Doctor," Brenner said. Really, Terry couldn't resist poking a little fun. "You've been in one?" "No, not personally," he said, giving her the point. "But I've used them before in research. There's nothing to worry about. Your vitals will be monitored the whole time. The lack of external stimuli helps with focus. You want me to focus on expanding and exploring your consciousness. I'll be here to guide you. When do you tell me what we're after? It might help me do better." "I just did." "You haven't really explained, though. You're a man of few words." He gave her an apologetic look. "The exact nature of our work is classified." The other technicians and lab staff around them had begun to watch their exchange, riveted. "Who has the medical cocktail?" Brenner asked the group. "We all have our secrets, Miss Ives," he said, laying an easy hand on her shoulder. "Our research here is about new ways of exposing them." So this research was about uncovering secrets. For all that told her. But could see how that might be important. and now the same aide as before was bringing her a small paper cup filled with LSD extra as she'd come to think of the lab mixture. Andrew had laughed at her description of the trip, not to be mean, only because he had done 3 times as much acid at Woodstock and it seemed like lightweight stuff to him. "Down the hatch," she said, and took a swig. The liquid went down bitter, and she wondered how she could have ever mistaken it for water. She'd done some research on LSD. Not that there was much out there. Lysergic acid, diethylamide, acar acid, was first made by a Swiss scientist in the late 1930s and had experienced a spike in popularity over the last few years, starting in San Francisco and Berkeley. Filed under psychedelic. Arguments for and against its use tended to make the stuff sound like either the makings of a miracle or the gateway to insanity. Then there was Brenner's use of the word cocktail. What exactly was in the Hawkins special acid blend he wasn't likely to tell her. "Ready, doctor?" Brenner approached her again, a reassuring look on his face. He fixed a sticky suction cup monitor under the right strap of her wetsuit. "Remember, it'll be right here." Climbing up the platform reminded her of visiting the public pool back home over childhood summers, of the way the other kids dived and dared her to, even though she'd never been a very strong swimmer. One day when she was 12 she gave in and plummeted into the deep end again and again because it turned out to be fun. The lifeguard had to haul her out when she got exhausted and panicked. He yelled at her. 16-year-old Becky had come over and argued back at him that he should have stopped her kid sister from diving at all. Terry had snuck away while they fought and jumped off the high dive one last time. She hadn't been allowed back at the pool the rest of that summer. When she reached the top of the steps to the tank, she peered down into sloshing darkness. Sensory deprivation. Of course she hadn't expected to be able to see in the water, but the images that floated through her head were the absolute worst. Coffins. Drowning. Drowning in coffins. She thought of her parents again. "It's all right," she told herself. "It is nothing can hurt you here, doctor." Brenner handed her a helmet not so different from an astronaut's. "So you have a steady supply of air." She slipped it over her head, only then questioning why he'd bothered to give her a bathing cap. At least oxygen wouldn't be a problem. She swung her now heavy head around to look at him. He watched her with expectation. "Go on," he seemed to be saying with his eyes. She offered him her arm to help her as she stepped into the water. The wetsuit insulated her from the chill. She reclined and the water became a splashing weight against her. True to Brenner's claim, the tank wasn't entirely unpleasant. Not until she'd entered completely. He removed his hand, and the light got thinner, then vanished with the dull thud of the top being closed. How dingy she wasn't. Hello, anyone else in here?" she spoke, her voice muffled in the helmet, trying to joke. "Just you." Brenner's calm voice in her ears. The helmet was wired for sound. The darkness grew. She tried and failed to relax. Her breathing picked up its pace and spots appeared at the edges of her vision. She attempted to move around, but it was hard in the water. "Your heart is racing. Breathe deep," Brenner said. "Relax. Close your eyes. Let the medicine begin its work. Go deeper." Easier said than done in a water coffin, but she did her best to steady her breath. Could she go deeper again? Had that been the hypnosis? Was she getting Swiss cheese holes in her brain from the acid already? Asking the questions helped her get control of herself. She fought to steady her pulse. Sweat crawled down her face and she knew if she focused there while unable to wipe it away she'd lose control. Worse. So she closed her eyes. Not that it mattered. She reopened them. The darkness reigned. Deeper. "Now, Terry, focus inward." Brenner's voice in her ears might as well have been inside her head. "I want you to let your memory open. Describe what you experience. I don't want you to look for pain this time. Look for comfort." Maybe because her mind had nothing to go on but his voice, maybe because the drugs kicked in, or both, her memory switched on as soon as he suggested it. Her mind conjured somewhere for her to be besides this tank. A feeling of being more than awake, more than alive danced at the edges of her awareness. "Where are you?" she imagined, sinking her toes into the thick shag carpet in the living room at home. She and Becky sitting side by side on it as they watched Johnny Carson with her dad. The smell of popcorn, her mom in the kitchen shaking a pot on the stove, the two of them jumping up to go watch the top of the pot lift off as the kernels popped. Watching TV with my dad and my sister. We're only allowed to stay up past bedtime for this. My mum makes popcorn a treat. We're all together. Usually revisiting happy family moments brought sadness too, but this was like a warm hug. Let's move on. What's another comforting place for you? Andrew's bedroom. This wasn't just a where, this was a when. The first night Shed stayed over at his house. A candle on the bedside table, along with incense burning. It had felt so grown up. This was adulthood, thick sandalwood and the exotic feel of another person's sheets. Of a man's sheets. Even if they were regular cotton. She couldn't hear what they said, couldn't remember the conversation, but she heard their laughter together and a feeling of safety melted through her, or she melted into it. Streaks of rainbow colors appeared around Andrew's face, and she wished he was here or she was there. "Terry, where are you? You're laughing." "I'm with Andrew." "Andrew, my boyfriend." "What are you doing?" he asked. She couldn't describe that. "Being together." "And that comforts you?" "Yes." Her brain cycled on, and she answered every question until, after no time, after all time, his voice said, "We'll be bringing you out soon." Try to go even deeper. There was somewhere she wanted to go, but her senses were slippery. She'd forgotten where she was, and now the water lapped around her as she tried to remember. Deeper, she thought. Deeper. She pictured those white church doors. She wanted to go back there, and for some reason thinking of it didn't hurt. "Okay, we're going to open the lid slowly, Doctor," Brenner said. She wanted to protest that she needed more time, but then overhead fluorescence blinded her. "You might want to close your eyes," he told her. Terry did, and then reopened them, moving slowly, a stranger to light and motion. 2. "You're not worried?" Andrew asked Terry, sliding her hand into his as they walked across campus. "Not really," Terry said. "Maybe a little. That's why I'm bringing you." Becky had called Terry to tell her that she'd gotten a letter at home telling Terry to stop by the administration office at school. She'd sounded worried about it and asked if she should come. Had Terry gotten into trouble? Terry figured it was some mix-up or forgotten paperwork. Classes had just started. These things happened, didn't they? Okay, so never to her before, but it wouldn't be the most unlikely thing. "It wasn't good news when they called me in," Andrew said. Terry squeezed his hand in a way she hoped comforted him. He'd gotten in trouble for ditching campus for Woodstock. Academic probation. A very big deal because getting kicked out would mean the loss of his student deferment. None of the guys wanted graduation to come. "Y'all just be more careful," she said. "Besides, you said it was worth it." He shook his head, lost in a blissful memory. "You would've loved it." "I know. You start reading the book yet?" Terry groaned. Andrew had fallen in love with The Lord of the Rings on the van ride to New York and back, and then presented her with his battered copy of the first book when he returned. The cover featured a wizard in flowing yellow robes with a long white beard on a mountaintop. He swore she'd love it too. "It's 3 books. Babe," Andrew shook his head. "It's great. I'll read it, I promise." "Good, because that's what I want for my birthday next week." Noted. They reached the administration building, 3 stories of brick and glass. Andrew opened the door for her. The letter had specified room number 151, and they found it at the end of the first floor, the registration department. She'd been here before. Andrew dropped into a plastic chair in the waiting area as she approached a desk. "Hi there," she said. In Terry eyes. "My sister got a letter telling me to come by." The clerk looked at her blankly through cat's eyeglasses. "What kind of letter?" "I don't know. We weren't sure what it was about." "Terry Ives, you said." "Teresa." Terry nodded. "That rings a bell. Wait here. The woman swung around and bustled back into a warren of desks and filing cabinets. Terry turned and made a face at Andrew. He made one back, then nodded behind her. The woman had returned, of course. Great first impressions were Terry's special gift. The woman didn't react to Terry and Andrew's game. We were to inform you that you'll be excused from your Thursday classes, she said. Why Terry knew how school worked, and they expected you to attend class. She couldn't help glancing over her shoulder at Andrew, who shrugged with the same confusion. You'll be getting credit for the psychology research you're participating in, the woman said. You won't have to make up assignments on those days. The school has let your instructors know. You're to be at the psychology building at 9 a.m. each Thursday unless told otherwise. Okay, Terry said and shook her head. But what's the catch? Your overall academic performance will be tied to your continued participation, the woman said. Other than that, she shrugged. Terry planned to keep going anyway, so that wasn't a big deal. It's unusual, but it's what we were told. The woman lowered her voice a touch. What kind of research is it? She definitely couldn't answer that. Private, she said. I don't need to do anything else. Nose in the air, not happy at being rebuffed, not at this time. A dismissal. Andrew stood and they moved back into the hall. What the hell? Andrew asked. My thoughts exactly, Terry said. Who are these people? Andrew frowned, something he rarely did except when listening to the news. He was worried about her. Sweet. I told you, it's a big deal. That's why I'm doing this. I'm not sure I like it. His gaze went back to the room they'd left. But you can see it's important. Terry leaned in close, and they kept their voices down as other students walked past. They just called up the school and told them to give me Thursdays off, and I'm getting credit for it. They're tying our grades to doing this. And no one asked any questions. They just agreed. I have to keep going. Andrew rested his forehead against hers. Babe, I hope you know what you're doing. I do and I don't, she said and gave him a light kiss. Some administrative type in a suit cleared his throat and they separated, but she extended her hand and Andrew wove his fingers through hers. You're my witness to whatever comes of this, she said. I hereby solemnly swear. He really was worried about her. His eyes were so brown, his grin so nice, Terry forgot to worry about anything for a little while. 3. The diner's slow days were few and far between, and like a promised land entirely for taking a breath while getting paid. One of the busboys slung off his apron and told Terry he was taking a smoke break. She confirmed the floor stood desolate and said, have an extra for me. He didn't point out that Terry wasn't a smoker. She decided to refill the cutlery station to keep busy. Also, then she wouldn't have to do it later. It was Tuesday, and apparently her next visit to the lab would be in 2 days, 1 week since her last one. Previously they'd been only every 2 to 3 weeks. The schedule acceleration, along with the morning's news, must mean something, but what? Becky would have too many questions about this get-out-of-school-free Monopoly card she had drawn. Terry planned to tell her that all it had been was the school wanting to confirm she was happy in her major. If it was still slow when she finished with the silverware, there was always the ratty paperback edition of the Fellowship of the Ring in her purse. She could get started on Chapter 2. The bell above the door jingled and Terry smiled in recognition at Ken. Hi, she said, coming around from behind the counter. She snagged a menu and a set of silverware. Fancy seeing you here. Sit anywhere you want. Ken lingered awkwardly inside the door for a moment before launching into motion to his right. He slid into the second booth. This is the right one. Terry shook her head, amused. She plopped down the menu and silverware. If you say so. What can I get you? Nothing, he said. Nothing. Terry couldn't figure him out. Then why are you at a diner? The bell jingled again, and she spun to see Alice barreling through it. Alice, she said quietly to Ken, as the girl spotted them and made her way toward the table. You're here to meet Alice. Anything I should know? Alice, however, stopped beside Terry and propped her hands on the hips of her greasy coveralls. "What's he doing here?" she demanded. Then, gesturing opposite him, "Is this seat taken?" Ken raised his brows at Terry. "No, it's all yours," he told Alice. She took the spot. "So," she said, and paused, gathering her thoughts. Terry wanted to know what both of them were doing here without expecting each other. This was too much of a coincidence. But when she looked up, she saw another familiar figure on the sidewalk outside. Gloria. "Hold that thought," Terry said, and the bell jingled behind her as she went outside. "The gang's all here," she called across to Gloria. "Did you and Alice plan to meet up?" Gloria hesitated. Today's ensemble was relatively casual for her. A pastel flower print blouse tucked into a deep green knee-length skirt. Her handbag matched. "What is it?" Terry asked. "I don't usually come over to this side of town," she said. "I didn't really think before I headed this way." "It's fine here," Terry said, understanding. "No one will bother about it." Bloomington wasn't officially segregated these days, except in spots like country clubs and their golf courses. Unofficially, most people stuck to their own neighborhoods and racial lines. The campus was the site of major protests from black students fighting for equal treatment. With a nod, Gloria glided across the sidewalk and into the diner behind Terry. She shook her head when she spotted Alice and Ken. "I thought you were joking about them being here, too," she said with a slight frown. "They weren't expecting each other," Terry said. "At least I don't think they were." "Or you," Alice said. "What are we all doing here?" "I think that's my question," Terry said. "Since I'm the only one who has a real reason to be here." Gloria joined Ken and Alice at their table, sitting beside Alice. Terry took another look around to confirm her boss was still in back waiting for fresh tickets and sat down too. "I'll get your orders in a sec," she said. "What's up?" Gloria was still frowning. "Did you get the notice from school?" "Yes," Terry said, not sure why Gloria seemed concerned about it. "What notice?" Alice said. "Can we get some fries?" She paused and fidgeted, twisting her hands together like she was nervous. That was new. "Wait, are they good here?" "They're great," Terry said, and got up. She scribbled the order on a ticket and tacked it into the kitchen. Seconds later, the fryer started up and the glorious smell of bubbling fat filled the air. She went back to the table, but didn't bother sitting down. The kitchen was fast. "Gloria and I are excused from our Thursday classes." "Me too," Ken said. "I didn't know you were a student," Gloria said, surprised. Ken folded his hands together on the formica. "You guys haven't asked me much about myself." Alice rolled her eyes. "We're afraid of what y'all say." Ken wrinkled his nose at her. Alice laughed. Gloria put her hands on the table. "It's not just that we get Thursdays off. I was told my academic future is now tied to this experiment." "They didn't put it exactly like that when I asked," Terry said. "Just said we have Thursdays off and, well, that we had to keep going for our grades." She paused. "Oh. Yes, that's the academic future part." Gloria shook her head. "I don't like it. But it will be okay, won't it? We were going to go anyway. You already had to for your degree. Too many strings means something." Terry understood that. "That what we're doing is important." Gloria studied her nails. "Maybe. Why are you here?" Terry asked Alice. "You said you worked here," Alice said, as if it was obvious. "Figured if you had this shift last week, you'd probably have it this week too. That's why I came now too." Gloria's lips quirked to one side. "But I think she means why are you here to see her?" "Coincidence on the timing, at least for me." "Not me," Ken said. The cook's voice called out, "Order up." Terry darted over to get the fries and returned with the plate. Alice crammed a fistful into her face and winced at the nuclear heat. This was a high-maintenance table. Terry came back with waters for all three. She sat back down, picked up a fry, blew on it, then ate it. Alice swallowed. "So they called your school, and they called my uncle." Told him they would be happy to compensate him when needed at the lab as long as he lets me go. He said yes, but he's suspicious about it. He doesn't like government types much. She had another fry and then went on, do you guys think it's weird what we're doing out there? My uncle wanted to know what it was and I told him it was girl stuff, so he'd stop asking. You can't talk to anyone else about it because they'll think you've blown a gasket loose in your brain and we signed those papers. I thought I'd stop by here where we can discuss it. I don't like them going over our heads like this, Gloria said. Shouldn't they tell us before they do this contacting business? Terry wondered if the others had the same experiences on the trips as she had. Before she could ask, the door jingled again and she was surprised to see Andrew. Unpopular today, she said. This is my boyfriend, Andrew. He stopped at the edge of the table, uncertainly. Andrew, these are my friends from the lab, she said. Ken, Gloria, and Alice. We're having a private conversation, Alice said. Terry snorted a laugh. It's okay. You can trust him. He knows. So much for the papers we signed. Alice raised her eyebrows. Mine, Andrew asked, and waited for Alice's nod before plucking up a fry. What are you all talking about? Good question, Terry said. What are we talking about? Why the lab is suddenly so interested in making sure we keep going, Gloria said. Andrew pulled a chair up to the end of the table. I've been thinking about that. Do you know who runs this experiment yet? Gloria's eyes skated to Terry. She hadn't exactly filled Andrew in on that part. It's some arm of the feds, Terry said. Andrew tilted his head. You didn't mention that before, because I knew how you'd react. Terry didn't want to have this argument in front of her new friends. Apparently Andrew didn't either. So do you guys think it's odd that the feds would be spending time on this with the war going on? Shouldn't they be working on weapons or something instead? Ken lowered his voice, even though they were alone. Maybe they are. Terry scoffed. Is it me or Alice who's the weapon, or Gloria? Don't leave me out, Ken said. Andrew looked among them. Okay, probably not. Gloria didn't say anything. None of them hung around much longer besides Andrew. She paid for their fries out of her tips and still didn't go back to worrying about herself. She'd asked Brenner these questions on Thursday. 4. Alice's knees sweated at the back, right in the pits, as they walked down that pale hallway in the lab to the shiny elevator she now hated the sight of. She knew where it would take them. Knees were an unpleasant place to have the nervous sweats. And ever since they'd started giving her jolts of electricity, she imagined the lights in this place laughing at her, talking about her, how she might as well be one of them. Stuck here forever. Forced to illuminate the darkness. Illuminate was a good word, though. She remembered the preacher at church once describing illuminated manuscripts he'd seen on a missionary trip, and the picture she'd conjured to go with the phrase had to be more miraculous than the reality. It was thoughts like the talking lights that had made her show up at Terry's diner like a head case. She'd only been truly worried about the call to her uncle after hearing Gloria's questions. You okay? Terry asked, stepping away from Gloria and alongside her. You're awfully quiet today. And I haven't had to stop you from messing with anything electronic, Doctor. Brenner shifted his head so that Alice was staring at his profile. Fine. Alice nodded to Terry, then to Gloria and Ken, a silent chorus of concern behind her. You're sure you feel all right? Terry asked, placing the back of her hand to Alice's forehead. Alice flinched and regretted it. I'm fine. I'll make sure that Dr. Parks takes your temperature and says you're well enough to participate, Doctor. Brenner interrupted. Thank you, Terry told him. She won't have to do it today if she's sick. Of course not, Doctor. Brenner said smoothly. Alice almost believed him. Was Terry's experience different enough that she did? Alice thought it must be. Doctor. Brenner input his code into the keypad. Alice watched each finger move as if in slow motion. The elevator doors zipped open and she imagined carefully breaking the entire apparatus, severing the cables so the car wouldn't move. Soon she'd be back to hiding inside herself, looking for the quiet place beneath everything, with its ruins and drifting spores. The problem was, the quiet place was not somewhere she wanted to go. 5. The hospital gowns they were forced to wear during the experiments were an affront to dignity. This was a fact, not just Gloria's opinion. She could have done a double-blind peer-reviewed study to prove it. Not for the first time, she wondered what protocols the lab was following. Were she, Terry, Ken, and poor startled Alice all being put through the same motions? Nothing about this laboratory conformed to her expectations or what she'd read in textbooks about scientific studies, so somehow she doubted it. She couldn't even stop coming, not now that they'd tied her grades up in this. In for a penny, in for a pound. That was the saying. She held her hands on her lap and waited for the young doctor to arrive. Green was his name, just like his age. He was tentative with her, and she'd said a silent prayer of thanks about not getting saddled with Brenner. She could occasionally ask Green a question and get an answer. He came in with a clipboard in one hand and a small slip of paper undoubtedly coated in LSD in his other. "Hello, Gloria," he said, as if they were going to have tea. She kept her hands in her lap. "Doctor." "Green, I wondered, you said you studied at Stanford, correct? What about Dr. Brenner?" He set down the clipboard and carefully avoided her eyes. He'd rolled his shirt sleeves up one turn past where his tan ended. "I'm honestly not sure," he said. He took a sheet of paper off the clipboard and handed it to her. "I want you to do your best to commit the information here to memory. Then, after your dose takes effect, I'll be questioning you about it. Your objective will be to try not to reveal any of this to me. Got it?" Gloria accepted the sheet. It reminded her of test questions for high school, but was either a dummy or a real military report of the movements of enemy troops. "Got it." When she finished, Green exchanged the large paper for the small one, a yellow circle in the center, and she placed it on her tongue. Then he left her there alone to meditate. Unlikely. Gloria settled in and ran the information from the page which he'd taken with him over and over through her head so it would stick. The wall clock's numbers had a tendency to appear as if bleeding once the LSD took effect. Gloria discovered that if she closed one eye and waited 5 full seconds, she could correct for it. So when young Dr. Green returned, she knew it had been roughly 3 hours since she'd taken the hit of acid. She'd be at the peak of her trip, or close. Which explained the colourful lights that danced around him. Tripping was pointless to her, and she couldn't believe anyone enjoyed it. Maybe if they teased out some useful application of the drug through these experiments, her mind would change. She doubted it. He carried his clipboard and nodded to her. There were 3 of him. "Miss Flowers," he said. He'd called her Gloria before, she was almost certain. An orderly let himself into the room, tall and looming, standing in the corner. "Yes," she replied. "Could you please tell us the whereabouts of the troops in Sector 19? The frown made him seem older. He'd told her earlier to resist, and she'd woven that through her memorization. They would want the strongest possible controls for an experiment in gaining information under the influence of drugs. Yes, that had to be the entire point. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," she said. Or at least that's what Gloria thought she said. Certainty became slippery after the LSD kicked in. He pulled a chair away from the desk and sat down across from where she perched on the hard edge of the cot. She reached to adjust her skirt and remembered the thin hospital gown she was wearing. Suddenly the idea of how translucent it must be occurred to her. "Focus. Are you sure?" he asked. "Sure. That you don't know what I mean about Sector 19, about where the troops are heading?" "I am," she said, with a hint of a smile at how well she was performing her task. Green threw a glance back at the orderly. The giant stepped forward. He seemed too large to fit in this room, but there he was, looming over her. A shadow. A threat. "Are you sure you're sure, Doctor?" Green asked. She wanted to lecture him through the bright colors and the drug haze, tell him that this was no way to run an experiment. His phrasing was off. He was misusing a set of circumstances that would be difficult to replicate in the field. Miss Flowers Green demanded. Where are they? The giant's expression wasn't a smile, but it certainly didn't indicate disapproval. He's enjoying this. Gloria remembered the whispers and case studies none of her teachers ever talked about. Men with syphilis untreated. Slaves sold to doctors for experiments, black cadavers at every medical school. Not much more than 10 years ago, the Army and the CIA had released mosquitoes with yellow fever on black folk in Florida. Her skin made her a candidate for study to some people, and disposable to most of those same people. Gloria found that, as always, to stay in the game, she had to pretend she didn't know there was one. They'd never be content to let her win a round. Not even if it involved best practices. Of course I didn't realize what you meant. They are moving north at approximately 7 clicks per day. She held out a hand. If you give me a pencil, I can draw you a map. Doctor. Green raised his eyebrows and shot a cocky grin at the giant orderly. Now the orderly did look disappointed. Very good, Doctor. Green assured her. Sorry, Gloria thought at both of them. No, it's not. 6. The first part of Alice's trip stretched out in a calm blur and she relaxed. Maybe today there'd be no electricity. She wanted that tray of tools, to take something apart instead of lying on the cot being lazy. But she kept that inside, kept everything inside and quiet in the hope that they'd forget she was here until it was time to leave. Doctor. Parks had removed the tube of blood, which they did every few weeks, and labelled it with a date and Alice's name on a thin strip of tape. They'd listened to her heart, checked her vision, then handed her a dose of bad medicine. Sometimes Alice fantasized about the printing press that had brought the ad to her uncle's garage and to her attention. As with the elevator before, she imagined a slow dismantling, each piece laid out in a row until no message could be delivered at all. That made her wonder about Ken's experience here. He seemed just the same as when they'd started. If he was a psychic, then she'd like to punch him in the nose for telling them to get in the van that first day. Alice said, her mom's voice in her head. We don't punch young men. Not even if they deserve it, she asked. What's that, Doctor? Parks asked, coming through the door. At least Alice thought she'd just come through. And then she knew it because behind her was Dr. Brenner and that bearded orderly who always came at his side. That bearded orderly who brought the machine she most wanted to take apart and wreck. The one they used to shock her. Nothing, she said, swinging her feet to the floor and sitting up. Wait, I thought you were going to take my temperature. I don't feel right today. Doctor. Parks frowned. What are your symptoms? Besides the fact my eyes see like pinwheels on this junk. Doctor. Brenner stepped forward. It's psychosomatic. The treatment will help. Alice snorted before she could stop it. Doctor. Brenner's eyebrows raised so high they seemed to levitate above his head. Oh, because as a medical professional I can tell you that you probably feel poorly because it's been a week since your last treatment. I feel better the minute I'm out of this place. You haven't spoken about this to anyone, correct, Doctor? Brenner moved forward, waving for the machine to be brought to, and began to fix the electrodes to Alice's temples. I know we're not supposed to. She hadn't. She'd thought she might on the day she went to the diner, and then Terry's boyfriend said that thing about weapons, and she had realized maybe she was beginning to feel more like a weapon than a person with her desire to disassemble everything. It was silly. She knew it was silly. Good. Brenner placed a hand on her shoulder and gently shoved her down. Let's increase the voltage this week, Doctor. Park's hand went to her throat. Are you certain that's a good idea if she's not feeling well? It'll perk her right up, he said. Then, to Alice, want it. What was there to do but nod? It was the opposite of what Head told Terry he would do. Alice closed her eyes and waited. She decided she definitely would not scream or cry out or make any noise, but then the lightning passed through her and she gasped and sparks floated behind her eyelids. No, not sparks. Those spores she could never close her fingers around. She went to the quiet place inside beneath the reality she longed to escape. Alice felt out of joint here in the beneath as she'd begun to think of it, like she didn't fit. A daydream of decay filled with shadows. Today the shadows were motionless, walls and windows cracked, tendrils dead where they lay. Alice moved through the wheel of images in her mind to prove there was life here, that she was still alive. This week's drugs were something. She turned in a circle, closing and opening her eyes. The shadows grew now with each blink. Sunflowers rose up, leached of color. She felt dizzy. Alice whirled toward new movement. A monster, glistening and sharp. A dream. A nightmare. The kind of thing in those comic books her cousins read. The kind of creature that might result if you disassembled a life form and put it back together wrong. Arms too long. A head like a dark flower. She wondered if it longed to take apart things the way she did. Alice, can you hear me, Doctor? Hark's voice. You can open your eyes if you like. The black and white sunflowers swayed, the monster fading into them. Had it been one of them all along, maybe so. Butterflies burst out of the swaying stalks as the flowers returned to yellow gold. When she opened her eyes to the real world, the little room in the lab, Brenner was the first thing she saw. Monsters, she said, of course my brain has them. As long as they stayed in there, everything would be all right. Wouldn't it? 7. Terry had gotten lost in the moment, then the next, and the one after that, studying the floor, the walls, the ceiling. The ceiling, as she watched, it moved like a sky. Everything ordinary was made extraordinarily strange through the lens of her acid-soaked brain. By the time she remembered, she'd wanted to ask Dr. Brenner about the calls to the university, and Alice's uncle had left the room. Wherever he'd stepped out to, the orderly had gone with him. This week was in the small exam room, no one else around, talking through times when Terry wished she'd done something different, revisiting regrets. If she didn't ask Brenner while this was on her mind, she might forget again. The acid test is remembering anything. He wouldn't mind if she went to look for him, would he? She didn't think so. He'd never told her she had to stay put. Terry got up and went to the door where the knob spun. They'd left it unlocked. It was a sign, go on. When she stepped into the hallway, she was alone. She started walking. She took the first hallway she'd never been down before. Maybe Brenner's office was this way. The tiles on the wall danced around her. There was the sound of a door opening and footsteps, and she cowered alongside the wall. A man in a lab coat breezed around the corner in front of her and went up the hall, away from Terry. She darted forward, feeling like she was in a game. The door he'd come through went to a different wing. It had one of those fancy keypads beside it, and it was still part way open. Could she make it? She rushed forward and slipped through just before it closed. Yes. Another hall forked off almost immediately, but she went forward instead. The rooms she passed were empty, filled with a variety of machines and cots. Until one wasn't. In this room, there was a child. Was she hallucinating this? No, the child was still there. The little girl sat at a low table, coloring so hard she almost ripped the paper apart. What in the world? Terry knocked gently and opened the door to let herself in. Hi there, Terry said, doing her best to make her voice kind, soothing. Why would a child be here in the middle of a place where experiments with LSD were taking place? She wore a gown like Terry's. Who are you? The girl asked and blinked up at her. Terry moved to the seat across from the girl. She was too big and her knees jutted up comically. The girl didn't seem to mind. I'm a patient. Who are you? Carly. She paused. What's a patient? Someone who's sick. The little girl's black eyebrows drew together. Terry noticed that her drawing was of a man with slicked back hair. Brenner, she thought so. Are you sick? The girl asked. No, Terry said. I'm fine. Then why are you here? Oh, I'm part of an experiment. Do you know what that is? You're a subject. The girl dragged the word out. Me too. Does Papa know you're here? I'm not supposed to talk to most people. Papa. Was this Brenner's child? A shape passed by the door outside in the hall. Terry had a sudden suspicion that no one would be pleased to discover her in here. She moved off the chair, crouching to stay at Carly's level. Why don't we keep my visit our secret? I have to go now, but I'll come see you again. Okay. The girl shrugged. I like secrets. Terry needed to go, but she stayed for one last question. Are you a secret? Carly hesitated, then bobbed her head in a nod. I think so. I'll come see you as soon as I can. Carly nodded again and lifted her right index finger to her lips, the universal sign for quiet. Could a child this young keep a secret? Terry supposed a child who thought of herself as a secret probably had lots of practice. And so, she realized, must Dr. Brenner. 1. Andrew had gone to visit his folks for the weekend, and so Terry was forced to wait to unpack her discovery. Head told her what time he expected to be home, and she'd gone over to his apartment to wait. She pounced as soon as he walked through the door and deposited his backpack on the floor. He has a kid there, Andrew. A child. A little girl. Babe, hi, he said, obviously happy to see her. But also lost. Catch me up. Who has a kid where? Oh. She ran a hand through her hair. Sorry. The lab doctor. Brenner. She searched for the right place to start. I think we both need a beer. He touched her cheek and kissed her forehead, then headed for the kitchen. Good call, Terry said. I'm sorry. I've just been waiting to talk this through. You didn't bring it up to your lab friends. I liked them. Andrew opened the door, found 2 cans toward the back of the top shelf, and passed one to Terry. I don't know what it means, so I thought I'd better keep it to myself for now. But it doesn't feel right. Okay, lay it on me. He popped the top on his can and they went back to the living room. Andrew sat on the couch, but Terry was too filled with electricity to relax. As she paced, she described her acid-fueled wandering and how it had brought her to Carly and the conversation they'd had. When she'd finished up with the promise to return to visit the girl, she paused to take a sip of her beer. It's weird, for sure, Andrew said from the couch. Do you think anyone knows you saw her? You didn't tell the doctor guy, did you? Terry shook her head. No way. Roman too was afraid to say a word. I'm just glad I didn't get busted in the hall. He reached out a hand to pat her arm. Do you think you'd have gotten in trouble? I don't know. Terry finally swung down to sit beside him. I know you probably think this is my own fault. For volunteering. No way. He put his hand on her knee. So far, you've just seen a little girl. Assuming she is his daughter, maybe she is sick. She didn't look sick. But who knows if she's Brenner's kid? Maybe he's doing all this to try and find some kind of cure. Terry tilted her head back. But that doesn't feel right. There was something off about it. Her little room, it had bunk beds. That could be to make her more comfortable during whatever treatment. Maybe you should just ask him about her. Maybe. Terry imagined it. A week ago, she would. But she remembered Gloria's discomfort with how tied into the experiment their grades were. She needed more information first. How's everyone else doing there? Andrew pulled Terry down to the floor in front of him so he could knead her shoulders. She hadn't realized how tight and tense they were. They seem fine. Alice wasn't feeling well, but I think she was just under the weather. You could ask them what they think. He was right. I will, but I want to try to find out more about what this experiment is for, too. Why is it classified? Does it have something to do with this kid? Babe, could it just be because they're giving LSD to young, healthy adults? Terry sighed. Yeah, obviously, at a minimum. A chilling thought occurred to her. What if they're giving that little girl drugs? Surely not, Andrew said. Did she seem out of it? No, she seemed fine. But in his assurance she heard the echo of her mom all those years ago, telling her dad the things he'd seen in the war couldn't happen here. Terry knew they could. But she also believed that people could and would work to stop them. I just have to see what I can find out, she said. About all of it. I want to know what she was doing there. It'll make me feel better. You know I believe in you. He gave her shoulders another need. If you need to do this, you need to. I know. Who was Brenner and where had he come from? What had he been doing before this? Terry had more questions by the second, which meant she needed to go somewhere good at providing answers. 2. The library was hopping with action the next day. They were close enough to the beginning of the semester that everyone's best intentions of getting ahead, keeping up, and making the dean's list were still in play. Terry waited for a librarian in a line 4 deep beside a tall bookshelf filled with leather-spined reference volumes. She took the tattered paperback of the Fellowship of the Ring out from her bag and returned to Chapter 3. Might as well make some headway on Tolkien until she could make headway on digging into Brenner's background. Mess. Terry blinked up from a scene involving the hobbits. Andrew wasn't wrong. She'd gotten sucked in. The librarian had a weary face and a bun bobby pinned within an inch of its life. "Hi," Terry said. "I was hoping you could help me with something." She explained that she wanted to find information about a doctor who'd recently moved to the area, presumably a Ph.D. but maybe an MD or possibly both, and his past research. "And you don't know where he last worked or what university he attended?" "Nothing about his area of expertise." The librarian made it clear that only an idiot wouldn't bother to find out at least one of these things. "I'm afraid not. But it might have something to do with psychology." The librarian gazed past Terry at the growing line behind her. "Anything you can point me to that might help," she said, a plea. "I don't mind spending time on it." That earned her an approving nod. The librarian took out a notepad and wrote a list in tidy handwriting. "Check these places for his name. If we have anything, it will probably show up in one or the other. Good luck." First up was a shelf of thick books called Books in Print that turned out to catalogue titles, authors, and publishers. After trial and error at picking the right volume, she finally checked the BRs and found 3 Brenners but no Martin. Strike 1. Next, she consulted the list. That led to Who's Who in America, a list of biographical sketches that seemed to include every person who had ever been important and then a bunch of other people. Lots of researchers showed up as she flipped through, and hope rose in her chest as she finally got to the BS. She recognized some of the names there, but again, no Martin Brenner. The librarian had scribbled a note by the last item on the list, a long shot but worth a try. She had to go back to the desk to ask where the vertical files were. Once on the second floor, she went through a row of tall file cabinets with a mishmash of pamphlets and republished scientific articles. The collection sprawled, and so she gamely went through each file. This might be the one. Whenever she started to skip one, she stopped and went through it. Her fingertips were numb from shuffling through paper by the time she neared the end. The lights in the library swooned once, and then a cracking announcement over the PA informed students they had 10 minutes until the library closed. Terry had to face it. She'd come up with nothing. A big fat 0. It was as if Martin Brenner hadn't existed before he moved to Indiana and took over a prestigious government lab. Obviously that wasn't the case, but what did she do now? The librarian who'd helped her earlier caught her eye as she trudged back to the first floor toward the exit, and Terry gave her a sad headshake. The librarian nodded as if to say, "Oh well," but this wasn't an oh well kind of topic. She walked to Andrews, fighting how tired she felt. It would have been a lot easier for the hobbits to stay in the Shire, she told him when he opened the door. But they don't, do they? Frodo ends up with the ring and they leave with it. "I knew you'd like it," he said, beaming at her and dropping a kiss on her cheek. "Let me know when you're ready for the next one." "Where are you?" "Still early. The hobbits may be the ones without magic, but I can feel how it's going. You can skip the Tom Bombadil Goldberry section if you want. It's a little much. Now there's no way I'm skipping it." She paused. "But did you just admit this book isn't perfect in every way?" "Ha ha, she's so funny," and he tackled her, tickling her until she laughed, as effective as any Prince Charming waking an enchanted princess with a kiss. His touch had brought her back to life. There was a whole whirl. not just the lab and its psychedelic fever dreams and mysterious child. She had to remember that. 3. Terry drummed her fingers against the cot in the small room, then stopped as Dr. Brenner's eyes gravitated to them. Wavy rainbows seemed to radiate from her hand even once she stilled it. "You're not still nervous about the medicine, Doctor?" Brenner asked with a close-lipped smile that told her how silly that was. Not really. Which was true enough. It wasn't the medicine that had her tense. "That's good, Terry, Doctor," Brenner said. "You trust me, don't you?" A thread of cold paranoia unraveled inside her. Why was he asking that? Sure. He hesitated, watching her. "Very good. Because our work is going so well. Are you ready to go deeper?" "What is our work, or more specifically, what's yours? Who's Carly?" She didn't know how to ask the questions in a way where they could be taken back if they needed to be. If she was jumping to conclusions, she would lose her opportunity to participate in something important. She knew how he wanted her to answer, though. "Yes." "Good." He removed the small crystal from his jacket pocket and held it in front of her. "Focus right here, concentrate, and once you're focused, then count backwards slowly in your mind from 10. She didn't feel like it, and since it was her mind, there was no way he'd know if she didn't. She sat there, staring ahead but not allowing herself to fix on the crystal. "Now close your eyes." Her eyelid drifted shut, rainbows and sparks flying behind them. "It's time for the next step, Terry, Doctor." Brenner's voice said, smooth as satin. "Time to see what you're capable of. What transpires here will be a secret. You will maintain this knowledge and complete a task without discovery, but you will have no memory of my requesting it. Do you understand? Can you repeat this to me?" Terry had to fight to keep her eyes closed and the lie from showing in her response. What was this? Had it ever happened before? When he'd put her under successfully, she should stayed alert, paid more attention. "What takes place is a secret," she said. "I will maintain this knowledge and complete a task, but have no memory of anyone requesting it." "Good, very good." There was a moment of quiet, and then she heard the door to the room open. The orderly had left them alone, and so maybe he was returning. The scrape of something against the floor, and then the door shutting again. Her heart pounded in her ears, and she prayed she'd be able to hear Brenner's words over it. "Terry, are you ready?" "Yes." "You will remain in the trance state when you open your eyes." He paused, and she wasn't sure if she should go ahead and open them or not, so she stayed motionless. He said, "Now open your eyes." She did. He sat at a small table that had been placed in front of her. On it was a black telephone wired to nothing and nowhere. He picked up the receiver, and then an object so small she hadn't seen it at first. A small piece of black metal, thinner than a coin. "Do you see this?" he asked. She nodded. He put it back on the table, and then unscrewed the cover of the phone receiver's mouthpiece. "You see how easy removing this is? So easy anyone could do it, isn't it?" "It is. Even you can do this, Doctor," Brenner said, setting aside the plastic piece and retrieving the small bit of metal. He placed it into the receiver among the metal and wires there. "It must go right here, touching this wire to activate." Then he screwed the top back on. "And you will do it just like I did. Understand?" Terry reached out to pick up the receiver when he replaced it on the hook, assuming he meant right then. "No, not here, not now." "Doctor." Brenner reached into the pocket of his coat and then gently took her hand and returned it to her lap. He pressed something into it, and when she turned over her palm, she saw a twin to the small black metal piece he'd put in the receiver. "You will place this device in the phone at the florist's counter of Flowers and Gifts, the business owned by Gloria Flowers' parents. You will do so before your next session at the lab. Do you understand?" "No." "Why, yes, I understand." "Good. Close your eyes." She did. 4. Terry drove along 7th Street at a crawl, afraid she'd miss Flowers and Gifts. She shouldn't have been. The generous building had a long maroon awning with the name embroidered in ivory. A candy display was visible alongside figurines and picture frames and furniture underneath the words and gifts. On the other side, with an entrance of its own, was the florist's bright bouquets and sprawling ferns arranged in the windows. The address had been easy enough to find in the phone book at the dorm, not to mention accompanied by a quarter-page ad listing the dozens of things they sold. She parked at the curb right across from the store and got out of her car. A few kids playing hopscotch chalked onto the sidewalk gave her a "what's she doing here" look as she crossed the street. She put her hand in her jacket pocket, confirming the small metal device Brenner had given her was there. The door played a chime when she opened it, and the pleasant but strong aroma of fresh blooms hit her nose. An older, just as polished version of Gloria rose from a stool behind the counter. "Welcome," she said. "Can I help you with anything?" Terry walked uncertainly up the center aisle and breathed easier when she spotted Gloria sitting behind her mother on another stool. She was busy reading a comic book and hadn't noticed Terry yet. "I was hoping to talk to Gloria," she said. "Oh," her mother said, turning. Gloria looked up at Terry's voice and set the comic book down on her stool when she got up. "Terry, what's up?" Gloria came out from behind the counter to greet Terry. Over her shoulder, she said, "She's a friend. Part of the laboratory experiment." "Nice to meet you," her mother said, a fuller welcome this time. "Any friend of Gloria's is a friend of all the flowers." "Thank you," Terry said, feeling the weight of the item in her pocket increase. Then, to Gloria, "Can we talk in private?" "Mama," she asked, "you mind going to check on Papa so I can chat with Terry? I'll watch the shop." "Nothing to watch until people get off work. I'll be back in a few minutes." Her mother glided off through a connecting hallway linking the two businesses. "Now, what is it?" Gloria asked, eyebrows lifted to underscore the question. Terry swallowed and removed the device from her pocket. She unfolded her fingers and held her palm up where Gloria could see it. "What's that?" "It's a bug," Terry said. "I think, anyway. Brenner told me to put it in your phone here. He thought I was under hypnosis." Gloria shook her head, peering more closely at it. "What a beautiful little piece of evil," she murmured. "He thought you were under hypnosis, but you weren't." Terry nodded, relieved Gloria hadn't kicked her out. She'd taken a gamble coming here, but even if she didn't know Gloria well, she wasn't about to betray her. Not when Brenner had just added even more questions to the ones she already had. "I pretended. I'm supposed to do it before I come back to the lab." He said it was the next stage in my testing. "Their tests are garbage," Gloria said. "This is just more proof. It's the least scientific process I've ever heard of." She held out her hand and waved her fingers. "Give it to me. You tell me what to do and I'll do it. But then you'll be bugged." "I'll only leave it for a few days," Gloria said with a small smile. "And besides, we're a flower and gift shop. If anyone wants to listen to those phone calls, they'll just be bored." She hesitated. "I don't think it was about the listening, it was about seeing if you'd do it." Terry had done the same math. That, Gloria agreed, made it seem more likely and shook her more. "Have they asked you to do anything like this?" "No, not yet," Gloria said. "But they're experimenting with our memories, our minds. It makes sense they'd want to control us." "If they could use regular people to do their dirty work, you're sure he didn't suspect you were faking?" Terry was, actually. "I don't think he had a clue. And I'm supposed to forget he asked me to do it." "Good." Gloria moved to the counter. "We'd better hurry. Mum will be back soon." Terry joined her behind the counter and pointed to the receiver. "You screw off the bottom plate and touch it to the wires inside. That's what makes it work." Gloria removed the cover, intent on the job. Terry pictured Carly in her head. Carly, whom she'd not managed to slip away to try to find again. How would she manage to get through the door with its keeper? It's not like she could just wait for someone to come out again, or like she had any idea when Carly would even be present. She could chance telling Gloria about the child. Maybe Gloria would have a theory about what the girl was doing there. Gloria didn't even need further instruction, sliding the metal piece in cleanly and replacing the receiver cover. "That's it," she said and grinned conspiratorially at Terry. "You should come to Andrew's Halloween party," Terry blurted. "I'm asking Ken and Alice too." Gloria said, "Okay, sounds fun." Terry might even figure out what to say to them all by then. 5. Halloween had always been Alice's favorite holiday. She didn't mind standing out, being different. But it was a relief to have a day when no one noticed. When everyone stood out, wanting to be different than they usually were. Also, she got to play dress up. When coveralls were the usual clothes and socket wrenches the accessories, the reactions when you swapped them out for a nice dress were gently humiliating. Alice liked dressing up, but not the way everyone teased her. Affectionate, yet the undercurrent remained: you're not the kind of girl who wears dresses, can't make a silk purse from a sow's ear. Life required trade-offs. Not getting to have someone occasionally say you look nice without a wink nudge was one of hers. Part of her wanted to go full Cinderella for Terry and her boyfriend's Halloween party, but in the end she'd been afraid of getting the same sort of looks she got from the people at church in her best dress. So she went for another dream persona of hers. The costume had some glitz to it anyway. She'd modified a drugstore Elvis costume and ended up with a wide collar, big stars sewn here and there on the seams of the top, and the white bell bottoms. "Evil Knievel," Terry exclaimed as she opened the door to the apartment. Music bled out from behind her, the room already full of dancing people. Fragrant smoke rolled out. "Alice, it's perfect. Come in, Andrew. Come say hi to Alice." Alice beamed at Terry's correct identification. She was the car-jumping motorcycle daredevil for the night. Terry had bare feet with brown fur glued on, and wore rolled-up trousers and an old shirt. Her hair was arranged in tight curls, pulled aside to reveal pointy wax ears. "Who are you supposed to be?" Alice asked, puzzled. Andrew slid up to Terry's side, good looks muted only slightly by his own ridiculous curls and similar costume. He had fur glued to the top of his hand. "She's Frodo, and I'm Samwise Gamgee, from my favorite books. I let Terry pick, and she made me the sidekick. But I don't mind being her sidekick." Terry shrugged. "I like Sam, and I like Frodo. Let me get you a drink." Alice didn't drink, but she didn't say that. She just said thank you. She spotted a guy in a monster mask, thin plastic with a distorted mouth and giant teeth. If only he knew what real monsters looked like. Her dress-up joy dissipated a touch at the thought of the lab. That dark place and the darker things she'd been seeing there. Terry took her arm and led her in, shutting the door behind her. "Ken and Gloria are already here." A girl with bright red lips, a long black wig with a center part, and a tight, floor-length black dress stuck her hand out to Alice, fingers dangling. "Morticia Adams, pleased to meet you." "Ah, good one," Alice said. "I'm Evil Knievel. This is my roommate, Stacy," Terry said, and caught someone's eye over Alice's shoulder. "I'll be right back, and well, go find the others. I always hate parties where I only know a few people." Alice took in the packed room and dancing and wondered how many people Terry knew and how many parties she'd been to. Must be a college thing. This was the first party Alice had been to in, well, ever. Church picnics and fish fries didn't count. Of course, she did know every single person at those. "How did you meet Terry?" Stacy asked, dodging a guy in clown makeup and a dress who sloshed liquid from a cup. "The diner." Alice suddenly remembered how Terry had ended up at the lab. She'd taken her roommate's place. "The experiment," she said quietly. "How's that going?" Stacy asked, the words slightly slurred. "Terry never talks about it." "Chem. Only to Andrew and not to her roommate." "You didn't care for it," Alice said in answer. "It made me feel out of my brain, and not in the good way." Stacy shook her head and snorted. "About like that, then," Alice said. Stacy frowned, but Terry reappeared. "This way," she said, and tugged Alice along with her. The opening guitar licks of the Beatles with a little help from my friends rang out, and the assembled crowd of astronauts and witches and ghosts and superheroes cheered. When the lyrics started, everyone began to sing along spontaneously about getting by and getting high, louder on that part with help from friends and needing someone to love. Alice belted out the lyrics as loud as she could, and beside her, Terry did the same. The mellow tune and the singing made Alice's heart feel like it worked better, like the engine of her body was back in good running order for the first time in weeks. She laughed as the song finished, and Terry did too. Then she resumed leading Alice through the crowd. They emerged into a small communal backyard with a picnic table and a bonfire going. The night sky was clear, pinned stars on velvet. Were parties always like this, making you regret the outcome 1 second, then beyond glad that you had the next? Alice had whiplash. At least I'm wearing the right costume for it. Neville was as famous for getting injured as he was for surviving his crazy stunts. Ken got up from the picnic table. His hair flowed over his shoulders like normal. He hadn't bothered to trim his beard in days. He had on a Zeppelin t-shirt and jeans. "Are you dressed as yourself?" she asked, offended. The nerve of him, coming to a costume party without making any effort. "It's okay." Terry trying to smooth it over, hearing that Alice was serious. It was strange and nice being understood without having to explain. "Oh no," he said. "I'm supposed to be a narc." She squinted. "So you're a narc in real life, then?" "No." Ken laughed, but she didn't see why that was funny. "You're lazy is what you are," she said. But she moved past him when she saw Gloria rise from the table and throw out her arms for inspection. "Now that is a costume," Alice said, doing a full circle to admire Gloria's note-perfect Catwoman. The Eartha Kitt version with a slinky, glittery black jumpsuit and a necklace with big gold circles, a belt to match. She had on the cat's eye mask and ears and everything. "Back at you," Gloria said, smiling at Alice. Andrew came out to join them. "I hated how Lady Bird threw her under the bus." "All she did was speak her mind about the war," Gloria agreed. Alice nodded to Andrew. "I like you." Andrew handed her the beer can she didn't want and clinked his against it. "I have a feeling you're going to be like the little sister I never wanted." "No," Alice said. "Not another brother, that's the last thing I need." Terry put in, "Don't forget, he has a barracuda." Alice knew when she was beat. "I suppose I can have one more honorary brother." She sat down at the picnic table and Ken subtly reached over and slid away her drink. Surprised, she looked over to see his eyebrows raised in question. "Thanks," she said. "I'll get you some water in a bit." She forgave him for not wearing a costume. Terry and Andrew had to go back inside to play hosts, and Alice enjoyed being in the backyard with the only people she knew at the party. As long as she managed not to think about how they knew each other, it was fine. Alice was surprised that Gloria did accept some kind of drink from Terry when she came back out with a real glass and presented it to her. "I'd never make you drink out of plastic, Catwoman." "Cheers," Gloria said, taking it. Terry clinked her beer to the glass before they each drank. Other than a couple making out in the corner of the yard, the group was alone out here. Even Andrew was inside. Alice had work early the next day and had planned to enjoy dressing up but leave early. Now she wanted to stay put as long as possible. Party inertia. "Tell me your favorite thing about biology," Alice said to Gloria. "What made you study it?" "Oh, I want to hear this too," Terry said, sitting down beside Ken. "Had been remarkably quiet all evening. You probably expect me to say the cell or the miracle of life." Gloria folded her hands together on the table. "I expect you to say comic books," Terry said with a grin. "There are a lot of scientists in those," Gloria said, "but they're usually villains." "And you are no villain," Alice declared. It was obvious, but she said it anyway. "Thank you," Gloria said. "Anyway, biology is how we all and everything around us works." "So that was it at first, but not anymore." "Well, what is it?" Terry asked. "This might sound silly," Gloria said. "Never." Alice meant it with her whole heart. You can trust the people at this table, Ken said. All right. But Gloria studied the night sky as she answered like she didn't quite believe it. People working together. Scientific progress can only happen when people use the same standards and share their findings. Personal differences don't matter when it's working right. Only differences in the findings. Alice wanted to swoon. That's beautiful. Gloria smiled. Andrew wandered back out, steps meandering, and plopped down beside Alice. What are you talking about? The magic of science. Gloria didn't give the declaration the grandeur it deserved, but Alice allowed it. Good science, at least. The making-out couple had disappeared sometime in the past few minutes, and Alice realized there wasn't music inside anymore. Here she sat with the only people who might understand, and there was no driver to eavesdrop. No lab techs or doctors with machines she wanted to destroy and never repair. She hadn't thought to say anything tonight. But here, now, she could risk it. Do any of you see the monsters? The words slipped from her mouth softly enough for the night to swallow them. For a second, it seemed like maybe none of the others had heard. Terry shifted in her seat to fully face Alice. The monsters. Alice could back away from what Shed said. Keep the rest of it inside. Instead she kept talking. I don't mean Brenner and Parks and the rest of the staff. In talking about what I see in my sessions when he comes in and puts the shock on me. I get these flashes of monsters and they're ravenous and they won't stop. It's like looking through a hole in reality. It terrifies me. Alice had barely breathed as she let it all out, as much as she could stand. You've seen them more than once, Terry asked. Yes, Alice said, refusing to try to decode their expressions, grateful for the dark. Glad that Terry's tone of voice was neutral. It's probably just the drugs, but... What do the monsters look like? Ken put in. You're psychic, shouldn't you know? Alice snapped and then felt bad. Sorry. You're on edge. That's not how it works for me, he said. They look like nightmares, horror movie stuff. Tall and gangly. Muscular. Covered in hide and scales and not like people. Well, except one of them walks like a person. Almost. I don't see them for long, but I keep seeing them. When you say he shocks you, do you mean he's using electroshock therapy on you? Gloria's voice was not neutral. It was angry. Yes, he called it the electricity. I think it's because I like machines. I shouldn't have let them know anything about me. I haven't seen the monsters, Terry said. Alice felt her stomach begin to plummet. She shouldn't have said anything. Terry continued. But Roman too met a little girl at the lab. She calls Brenner Papa. When was this? Ken asked. Gloria said, I knew there was something else the other day. She wasn't sure how to tell you, Andrew said. Babe, go on. Alice leaned forward. She wasn't the only one with a secret. I was going to ask Brenner about calling the school and your family, but instead I found this child. Her name is Carly and she calls him Papa. She said she is a subject like we are. Andrew thinks maybe she's sick or something. Have you only seen her the once? Gloria asked. He hasn't left me alone again, Terry said. And she was in a wing with security behind one of those keypads. It was luck that I got in there the first time. And Brenner tried to get you to plant a bug for him. Gloria gave a low whistle. He did what Alice demanded. Terry explained the assignment given under supposed hypnosis, how she and Gloria had worked together to complete the task without Terry having to betray her trust. I can't believe he asked you to do that, Ken said. I can. What have we gotten involved in? Gloria asked. That's the question. I don't know, Terry said. But I'm beginning to think she put her hands flat on the table and seemed as sober as anything, as if she'd never had a drop to drink. I'm beginning to think this entire thing is bad news. I couldn't find a scrap on Brenner at the library. There has to be another way to get information. We need to find out as much as we can about what they are doing. There was silence, and Alice waited to see what everyone would say. I knew it, Ken said. Alice rolled her eyes. Sure you did. I did. Gloria cut in. No bickering. I told you what I love about science, and I wanted to learn more about how lab conditions work. I've already told Terry nothing going on there is as it should be, especially now that I know they're electroshocking you, Alice. None of this should be going on. Maybe with all of us working together we can get the answers Terry wants. Alice was in for that, but it wasn't her major concern. The monsters I see, I think, what if they're real? Somehow Brenner could, if he finds out, he could use them. Use me. Terry reached across and took Alice's hands in her own. That is not going to happen. I won't let it. She won't, kid sister, Andrew said. I can promise you that. Alice didn't believe that was something Terry or Andrew could promise, but she accepted it all the same. Do you think they're real? Ken asked. I don't know. That was the truth. It meant something that had even asked the question. Alice had begun to fear that they were, but she wasn't certain. So, if everyone's in, what do we do? That's a good question, Terry said. I need to think. 6. Brenner held out his hand and took an oversized towel one of the lab assistants had produced. This was 8's first time in the sensory deprivation tank and had given her a specific prompt to attempt to create a sunny day outside in the room. Nothing had happened, and he could feel the relief in the restless movements around him. Had hoped the tank would boost her gifts. The staffers present had probably been afraid of the same possibility. 8. He leaned forward and spoke into a mic wired into her helmet. You can stop trying now. We'll get you out. She would understand the disappointment in his tone. Had promised her a reward if she delivered, and he had carefully considered what he might give her if she accomplished a controlled illusion without encouraging her to continue questioning him. But there would be no reward for a lack of results. At his nod, an assistant opened the tank's hatch and helped 8 out. She tore off the helmet, thrusting it at the lab worker. Hubba, I didn't like that. He saw the dark red line of blood from her nostril at the same moment the illusion began. Bright sunlight blinded him, and he squinted. He flinched back, and so did the assistants. He forced himself to look, and a tempest of crashing waves surrounded them, arcing high overhead. He heard a cry to his right, the clattering feet of someone running. He'd have to find out who it was later. 8, he said, soothing. Impressed. He hadn't realized she'd ever seen an ocean, but it made sense. She was born across one, after all. Brenner simply watched as the waves rolled over them. The water didn't exist, but it looked and sounded utterly convincing. He could barely make out the patterns of the walls and outlines underneath it. He stood, waiting in the maelstrom 8 created while she cried harsh, angry sobs. The cupcakes, he barked when she'd managed the illusion for several minutes. He held out his other hand for the reward. A scrambling beside him, and a tech returned, breathing hard as she placed the hostess package in his hand. 8's favorite. Something to satisfy her temporarily, since she'd only gotten more insistent in her request for friends. Any break from that was welcome. The strength of her performance was an excellent revelation on which to end the week. Already had been encouraged by how swiftly Terry Ives had completed her assignment. She seemed none the wiser about his intention to rewire her brain by suggestion bit by bit to prove it could be done. 8. Brenner approached her carefully. The blood from her nostril trickled down to her mouth, and it